Jacob. Is this mic on? Can you hear me? Good. Thank you, folks, for coming out here to the talk by Jeff Pavlik on soldiers' food in the War for Independence. I want to give a special welcome to all the folks online as well. So a big shout out to Devin, for example, in Mackinac City, Michigan, who's with us today. To Marianne in Westminster, Maryland. To Liz in Amherst, Massachusetts. To Susan in Oxford, England, where it's nearly 11 at night. And to all the others, many of them who are watching right now. Welcome to everyone. I also want to thank our host for today's program, the Ann Arbor District Library. They provide us this presentation space as well as promotional and technical support so we can share these programs far and wide by live streaming them and by recording and posting them on the library's YouTube channel. I'm Randy Schwartz from the Culinary Historians of Ann Arbor. For the new viewers and visitors today, I'd like to briefly introduce you to the CHAA. We're an informal group bringing together all sorts of people that are interested in the history and culture of food and cooking. We were founded in 1983, and new members are always welcome. We have about 150 members currently, about half of them here in Michigan, and the rest across North America and some overseas. Besides these monthly talks, we also have twice yearly participatory theme meals, sort of like potlucks, but with a theme. Those are for members only. Our theme meal next June will celebrate Juneteenth and the foods of African Americans in the 19th century. If you're not a member of CHAA, we'd love to have you join us. Membership is only $25 a year for an individual or for a couple, and it includes a subscription to our quarterly magazine, Repast. A postal subscription to Repast by itself is only $20 a year, no matter what country you might live in. By the way, if you'd like to write something for Repast, or to give one of these talks for that matter, just contact us using the CHAA website, culinaryhistoriansannarbor.org, and we'll talk over some ideas. If you'd like to join our group or just to subscribe to Repast, you can find the information on that website. Click on the membership tab there. You can also follow us on Facebook. Just search for Culinary Historians of Ann Arbor. Or if you're here in person today, you can pick up one of these blue membership forms at the side table after the question and answer session. By the way, for those watching this event online via YouTube, if you'd like to ask the speaker a question, you can type it into the chat section and we'll try to convey it to the speaker. After the Q&A today, for those here in person, we have some treats for you to taste. Jeff made a soldier's pea dish, and he baked some hard bread accurate to the time. It's pretty hard by now, a couple centuries. And to wash it down, we mixed together a batch of switchel, also called haymaker's punch. It's a rustic, rural New England beverage made with water, molasses, apple cider vinegar, and ground ginger. So help yourselves to the snacks that we'll have set up on the side table after the Q&A. Our next talk, by the way, and sad to say it's our final talk of this school year, is just 2 weeks away on Wednesday, April 29th, same time, same room. We're very happy that we'll be hosting Alison Perez, a doctoral student in American culture at the University of Michigan, for a talk that she calls Sabores del Pasado, Exploring the Origins of Miami Cuban Restaurant Culture. So we look forward to that talk on April 29. Finally, now I want to introduce today's speaker. We're so privileged to have here with us in person today, Jeff Pavlik, a professional baker and bread historian who lives in Mount Clemens, Michigan. For over 30 years, he's been active in historical interpretation and reenactments at sites like Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan, Fort Michilimackinac at the tip of the Lower Peninsula, Prickett's Fort near Fairmont, West Virginia, and so forth. He grew up in an Army family, so he lived and traveled all over the U.S. and abroad, then studied at the University of Missouri-Columbia, where he earned degrees in American history and peace studies. In 1998, Jeff and his partner turned the historic Farmington Bakery into a functioning neighborhood business, Sunflower Bakery, where he was the head baker for 24 years, making items from the old recipe books as well as developing new items like breads, pastries, pies, cakes, and cookies for the customers. Today, Jeff works as a culinary arts teacher at Lincoln High School in Warren, Michigan, and he continues to be an avid reenactor at public events, museums, and classrooms around the U.S. He also manages a Facebook page called Old World Bread, where he posts short videos of his traditional baking techniques. So would you please join me in welcoming Jeff Pavlik.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is great. I was just looking out in the crowd. My dad was coming in. We have one of my sons is going to be in a play tomorrow, and another son is going to be running the sound at a play in Cincinnati at the university. And I know he's in Ann Arbor. He called me. He's like, "You want to get dinner?" Oh, is he here? I understand your dad's on the first floor. Good. All right. Well, that's good. I just thought wasn't expecting him here. This is all kind of a surprise. Anyway, so I was just looking out there. So yes, hello, my name is Jeff Pavlik, and I'm really honored to be here. I had the honor of writing an article for Repast, was it last year or so, on soldier's bread during the American Revolution, and it was a lot of fun. It's still available. Randy helped me out greatly. He's an amazing editor, and anyways, it's really nice to finally be here in Ann Arbor and to present to the culinary historians. So we're going to be talking about soldiers' food during the American Revolution. It's a very simple topic in some ways, but there's a lot of depth to it. I'll say that last week, a week ago, I was in West Virginia and I gave this presentation, and they really wanted like an hour-and-a-half presentation. So I had an hour-and-a-half presentation. So I cut it down the best I could, but some of them I'm going to have to kind of move through because it was just hard to kill those like slides. It was like they were, like no, this is really important. Of course, I just killed the whole show. Let's just talk about the American Revolution. It started in 1775, went to 1783, started in Lexington and Concord. The last major military battle was in Yorktown, Virginia, in 1781. But the war continued for several more years, especially in the South and in the hinterlands. It wasn't until 1783 that a peace treaty was drawn up. So it was a very long war. It was a war that took place in the entire stretch of what we knew as of European North America, all the way up to Quebec, all the way down into the South in Charleston, out west. As far as St. Louis, we don't think about this war being so expansive. We kind of focus on, the areas that we know of as colonial. But it was a very large war. There was 165 major engagements. It was a lot. And it kept going. Everyone thought it would end quickly. It did not, which meant that people had to continue eating. Right? So food becomes a major issue, that in some ways this war was won or lost by who could continue feeding their soldiers. Both the British and the American forces were always desperate for food. At no time did more than 40% of the colonists actually support the revolution. We look back now as Americans, and of course we're like, of course we would have joined. We're all patriots now. But at the time they weren't. At least 25% had no deep allegiance, and 35% were loyalists. They supported the crown, which meant that when you go out to get food, you're not going to get it from everyone. Like, not everyone is supporting this revolution. We had to figure out ways in which we could get as much food as we can for our soldiers while the British are trying to do the same. 375,000 men and women joined the cause of the independence revolution. Typical age of soldier was around 16 to 30. They're hungry men, hungry boys. About 2% of the soldiers were actually under 16 as well. So we can't forget that there was just young children involved as well. Though not as violent as battle, camp life was still dangerous due to poor sanitation, disease, and a lack of proper nutrition. The fact is, 70% of all the soldiers died of disease, not of gunfight. About 25 to 30,000 Americans' lives were lost. Only about 6,800 or so died actually in battle. Another 17,000 died of disease. And many of those diseases are directly attributed to malnutrition and to lack of vitamins and to poor health conditions that led to them succumbing to diseases. British and the Loyalists, they had about the same amount. They lost a total of about 24,000 people as well. So both sides took a tremendous sacrifice as far as human life. George Washington takes command of the Continental Forces in June of 1775. He has a lot to organize. He has a lot to get together. There were state militias that were already organized and that were used to kind of mustering, getting together. We had some semblance of an army, but it wasn't a unified army. Under Washington's command, we unified the army, and by August 8th, he finally sits down and writes, like, what are these folks going to eat? So this is his actual handwriting. This is like what he wrote down, and he made this whole plan in his mind. He was a great planner, in fact. He thought that what was going to happen was that on Monday, you were going to get a pound of salted beef or 12 ounces of salted pork. You were going to get a pound of fresh beef or 12 ounces of fresh pork. And then you're going to get 2 pounds of flour or bread. That's going to be Monday. That'll hold you for Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, you're going to get another pound of salted beef or salt pork, another pound of fresh beef and fresh pork, 2 more pounds of flour or bread. And then you'll get a larger ration of 6 cups of peas or beans, 1 cup of rice or 2 cups of cornmeal, and then you'll get a quart of spruce beer per man per day. And if they don't have the beer available, then you'll get molasses and you'll be able to make your own. And then you'd be getting 3 pounds of candles that'd be used for guard duty at night, and then 20 pounds of soft or 8 pounds of hard lye soap to keep everything as sanitary as you can and to help clean your body and to help clean your clothes. Then on Friday, you'd get another pound of meat, fresh, a pound of salted meat, and then a pound of salted fish. Because it was Friday, and they wanted to make sure that folks that wanted to eat fish could have fish on Friday. And then you'd get your other 3 pounds of flour or bread. This was the idea, that there would be a regimented amount of food given out at a regimented amount of time, and that everyone would, have enough food, and it would work. It seemed like a great plan. It was codified not until November by Congress. So Congress takes George Washington's basic plan and says, this is what we're going to serve you. This is the same amount of food that Washington proposed, but they kind of leave out the dates. They're like, we're not going to micromanage this. We're just going to tell you, here's the amount of food that we're going to put aside the money to make sure that everyone has enough food, and this will be what it is. This is how we're going to feed our soldiers. Problem is that the food in the colonies didn't all come from one place. The food was sectionalized just like the nation was. There was a northern New England section of the colonies, there was a middle section of colonies, and there was a southern section of colonies, and they each made something different. New England was known for hogs, beef, and fish, middle colonies, wheat, flour, corn, and fish, and southern colonies, rice and corn. So you couldn't get all the food you wanted in one place. So we had to figure out logistics. How are we going to put all this food together? At first, they had thought about trying to bring it all into central commissaries and then distribute it down the ranks. So we'll like bring all our food into one place and then we'll dole it out as we need. That plan never really worked. But what was going to work is that we had to bring in food from all kinds of places. So a letter to Washington in 77 says, a number of wagons on their way from Jersey with salted provisions, a number of cattle on the road from New England. Also from Pennsylvania, wagons are expected with flour, right? That all this food is coming from all over the place. It's, you know, that this is how it ran. This is how the colonies were distributed as far as what they were growing and what they could do to help feed soldiers. So they, again, thought by 76 they'd have central magazines, and then they would break it down into smaller brigade levels, and the brigade would send it to a regimental commissary, and the regimental commissary would send it to a company commissary, and then that would be distributed to what we call the mess. And the mess was the basic unit of feeding, 5 to 6 soldiers at a time. That blew up within a year, because we sometimes had commissaries here, and the battle was way over here. You know, or we needed to march our troops over here and the food's still over here. So by 77, they had what they called moving magazines. They would just move the food with them. You know, they'd put as much food on wagons as they could and march it along with the soldiers, including cattle. So thousands of cattle would just be pushed along with the soldiers, you know, behind them. So when you got to a place that you needed food, your food was on the hoof or it was in the wagon. That was the hope. This ration changed throughout the war. This one is of beef, pork, and fish. You know, they had what they thought was going to be the allotment that they set out by Congress, but every year that changed. Some years it was like, hey, we have way more cattle than we have pork. Other years it was like, we don't really have fish right now. Like, you know, there's just no way to get fish to it, so they just took it off the menu. Same thing with drink rations. In the beginning, they thought they were going to be having milk and spruce beer. Milk was a big problem. Moving dairy cattle just didn't work. Just wasn't going to serve soldiers milk. So we still continued with spruce beer, but spruce beer also became an issue. Getting molasses from the slave colonies was an issue, and so it was time for just spirits, whiskey and rum. You know, we'll just cut to the chase. By the end of the war, we started trying to bring back milk. We started trying to bring back spruce beer, and the liquor never went away. You know. So the British were eating quite, had rations as well, but they ate differently. You'll notice that they had their beef or pork, they had their bread or flour, they had their spirits, and they had their spruce beer. They had their peas, but not beans. Beans are indigenous to North America. You know, the British were going to eat what they were used to. They were used to peas. They continued with their peas. They also wanted oatmeal and rice, as well as butter. The American soldiers sometimes would get butter, but it wasn't on the ration list. And they had also what they called the small species, sugar, chocolate, coffee. Those things were sometimes available to American soldiers, especially if the state itself bought it. Sometimes the state of New Jersey would say, we are going to send all of our soldiers sugar and chocolate. And they would get sugar and chocolate. But troops from Maryland were like, we don't get that. You know, it just really depended on your state sometimes, what the state was going to send out to soldiers in the field. And then sauerkraut. Sauerkraut was something that soldiers all wanted. The British put it on their menu, but it wasn't never on the menu of the Americans, though they desired it greatly. And we'll talk about why. So when we're looking at this ration list, if you got your optimal amount, you got everything they told you were going to get, you would get about 3,500 calories, of which 21% was protein, 58 carbs, and 21% fat. So let's compare that to what the MRE is, the meals ready to eat. This is what our modern American soldier has in the field. They get 3 of them. Each of them will total 3,750 calories if they eat it all, of which 13% is protein, 51% carbs, and 36% fat. So you can see that there's a slight difference in our nutritional learning now. You know, this is considered a more balanced diet than what they were feeding them. But they roughly compare, you know, that the Continental Congress was trying to give something to the soldiers that would last, that would give them their daily nutrition and fill them up and give them the strength to continue on. But the reality is, most soldiers got what they call a pound of each. In this presentation, I'll be quoting a whole lot. I'll be reading a lot. You can read along with me. These are all people that were there. I mean, I can tell you all about it, but I wasn't there. So let's listen to what they have to say. 1 pound of beef or pork, 1 pound of bread or flour a day, a small quantities of vegetables when to be had, 1 gill of rum or whiskey a day, a small quantity of vinegar, salt, soap, candles a week. That constitutes a ration. That's Dr. James Thatcher in September 1776. We drew a day's ration of beef and flour, what was called a pound of each. The flour perhaps was not far from its nominal weight, but the beef was not more than 3/4 of a pound, and at that, at best, half bone. That's Private Joseph Plum Martin, 77. I'll go back to these two a lot. I like them. They were there. They were there for the entire war. Dr. James Thatcher enlisted as a surgeon. He was in his very early 20s, and he stays all the way till 1783. Private Joseph Plum Martin was an adventurous teenager. He was 16 or 17 when he joined up, and he didn't really see anything else going on, so he just kept going. He just kept re-enlisting. He stays until 1783. Both of them kept some amount of journals. Martin's is a little sketchier as to how much he had written down during the war. He wrote his book almost 50 years later, but it's incredibly accurate to every other primary source we have. There's very little in it that doesn't jive with what we know to be true. Dr. James Thatcher actually kept a running journal, and then he went back 40 years later and filled it in. So these are people that were there. So if they say that they got a pound of each and that was their normal ration, that's what we're also going to see. Besides what the military was going to give you, that Congress was going to pay for, there were sutlers, and a sutler was a small store. Now the U.S. military has a commissary and a post exchange on Army posts that sell to soldiers, other things. They get fed, but they want more. So a sutler was the same idea. They reside in and follow the camp with food, liquor, and other items for general use or consumption. That's right, military bases have Class 6 stores as well. Liquor was a big part of this. They worked in all camps, any fort, any barracks, any garrison. As long as they had permission to be there, they were allowed to be there. But they had to have set prices, and the prices couldn't compete with congressional contracts. So sometimes other people would have a congressional contract on butter, and you couldn't lower your price so that you would sell your butter and not the butter that was available. So prices were always strictly controlled, but these sutlers had a lot of things that they could bring along with them, including liquor, wine, beer, cider, tobacco, coffee, sugar, writing paper, hams, mutton, fowl, eggs, and vegetables, because vegetables were always in short supply. So this is a place that you could go. Not that the military was paying you a lot, but if you had some money or had something that you could exchange, you had a place to buy more food if you could. Our troops are almost in general almost naked and very often in a starving condition through the mismanagement of our commissaries. I wish the state sutler was sent not with liquor, but with necessities such as tea, sugar, coffee, chocolate, the necessities, as we can scarcely live without them, having for some time past been without vegetables of any kind. 1777, Colonel Livingston. Sometimes we try to figure out ways of augmenting this food, this lack of food. During the winter in Valley Forge, Washington realized that his food was running low. He didn't have a lot of food. But there was a lot of farmers in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Delaware, and they could get there to Valley Forge and sell their goods if he maybe set up a farmer's market. So he did. He set up a farmer's market. Here we see the prices and the things that they were allowed to bring. Besides more meat, they could also bring cheese and sausage, eggs, potatoes, sauerkraut, turnips, apples, Indian meal, tobacco, milk, soap, beer. What they was trying to do was entice people that had an option. Their option was either to sell to the British or sell to the Americans. So if Washington could get those people to come to the American side and stay at Valley Forge, then they could actually hold a weekly market. And actually, it was a daily market that would move from camp to camp. Valley Forge is huge. and there was, over 10,000 men there. So they would kind of move around, and they would continue bringing in supplies. It was a way to augment this lack of food that Congress wasn't able to supply. It didn't work all that well, but these are all solutions of how to get food to these people. You were not allowed to trade your clothing or equipment, so that was kind of a bummer because a lot of people didn't have money. But what they did have was all their GI gear. So we know in wartime soldiers are good at trading off their government-issued things for things that they want. If we couldn't buy our food and they weren't giving us our food, then we had some more options. Another option, one option would be to garden. Now, Valley Forge wasn't going to be a gardening situation because we were there in the wintertime. But if you were at a garrison camp or a fort, you were encouraged to garden. You were encouraged to set up a plot of land and grow some of your own vegetables, and soldiers did that quite readily. But most of the soldiers in this war were in the field, and they were moving around constantly. So foraging became part of it. And even Washington encouraged it. There is plenty of common French sorrel, lamb's quarters, otherwise known as white goose feet, and watercress growing about camp. The general recommends to the soldiers constant use of them, as they make an agreeable salad, and having had the most salutary effect. The regimental officer of the day is to send and gather them every morning and to have them distributed among the men. In the middle of a war, General Washington is telling people, go out and make salad. Like, that's your job today. There will be people that are assigned to salad duty because there is a lack of vegetables. So at least we can go out into the woods and find something to eat. Foraging also has a different connotation. This particular image is from the Civil War, but this is what soldiers do. They just find food. A patrol came across a sheep and 2 large turkeys. Them not being able to give the countersign, the password, they were tried by fire and executed. Well, it sounds like Sergeant Smith just killed a few farmers' livestock. But he really liked doing that because a year later, pleasant weather and nothing to eat but a little flour made with coarse Indian meal and a little flour mixed with it. At night, the fortune of war put into our hands a poor sheep, which we roasted and boiled and gave the company a good supper. Yeah, Sergeant Smith was really good at this. Other kind of foraging, just what we think of as foraging nowadays, right? Going out in the woods and finding wild foods. The troops are so destitute of clothing that their footsteps are marked with blood for want of shoes. Their food consists part of time of rice with frogs from ponds and dishes, and sometimes of peaches and berries. That wouldn't be exactly the course I would set out for, but that's what we had to eat. Joseph Plum Martin talks about foraging throughout his diaries. In just 1776, him and his buddies, they went out and found chestnuts. They found a field of turnips. They just found it. Black walnuts, a beehive. They found a goose, and they went fishing. So men were, when not engaged in battle, were taking the opportunity to find food for themselves. The other kind of foraging is a foraging that is, not so much fun. Corn, peas, squash, potatoes, onions, turnips, cabbage, cucumbers, watermelons, carrots, parsnips, etc. What our men and horses and cattle could not eat was destroyed this morning before we marched. We totally destroyed the town and the orchards. Now this is from the American side. Sergeant Moses Fellows was in Iroquois country in 1779, part of the Clinton-Sullivan campaign, in which basically the Iroquois had aligned themselves with the British, and Washington thought the easiest way to end that alliance is to starve them out. So we sent American soldiers up through the New York Valley and destroyed tens of thousands of acres of food, just with burning down fields of corn of 80 acres at a time. Of course, they were eating as much as they could and then destroying the rest. But this is part of war that took place, and the British did it as well. The British were known for marching into an area and taking as much of the fruit off the tree, but found it easier just to chop down the orchards and then take the fruit off. And then, of course, those people were destitute and had no more, apples next year. So this was a regular part of warfare during the 18th century. Foraging type 3 is something that we have to reckon with. Private Plum Martin says he gets a cushy job. He's been in the field now for 2 years, and And he finally gets a cushy job at Valley Forge. He's put on the foraging expedition crew. We are understood that our destiny was to go into the country on a foraging expedition, which was nothing more or less than to procure provisions from the inhabitants for the men in the army, and forage for the poor perishing cattle belonging to it, and at the point of the bayonet. Had to run the risk of abuse, if not injury, from the inhabitants when plundering them of their property, for I could not, while in the very act of taking their cattle, hay, corn, and grain from them against their will, consider it better than plundering, sheer privateering. It got desperate at times, and we just took it. General Washington said in 1778, I do therefore authorize, empower, and command you forthwith to carry off and secure all such horses that are suitable for cavalry, or for draft, and all cattle and sheep fit for slaughter, together with every kind of forage that they may be found in possession of any inhabitants. 25% didn't care, 35% were pro-British, 40% were pro-American. At some point, you're just going to take it all, And the British were doing this exact same thing. In this area around Valley Forge, both armies, the British Army was wintered in Philadelphia. The American Army was 20 miles away in Valley Forge, and the lands in between were just chaos because everyone was just stealing as much as they could. But soldiers were to request food and animals the Army needed from local farmers and then issue IOUs, from a country that doesn't exist and a banking system that doesn't really have any money. But in case of refusal, you will begin to impress till you make up the quantity required. This you will do with as much tenderness as possible to the inhabitants, having regard to the stock of each individual, that no family may be deprived of its necessary subsistence. Milk cows are not to be included in the impress. So we'll leave you your milk cow, we'll ask you first nicely, and then we'll take whatever we need. And of course, this is a battle of souls. It's a battle of who's going to, what side are you gonna push, loyalists just further into the crown's hand? Are you gonna take patriots and then say, well, I'm apathetic, or now I'm angry that you just took everything of mine? But this is how the war went. This is what had to happen in order to feed all these men. Fatal experience has taught the people of America the truth that a greater proportion of men perish with sickness in our armies than fall by the sword. Dr. Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration of Independence and amazing thinker of the Enlightenment and American history. In my opinion, we have lost not less of 10 to 20 soldiers from camp disease for every one by the weapons of the enemy. He was about right, that people would die more rapidly of typhoid or typhus, what they called camp fever, dysentery from bad sanitation and bad food. They would die of scurvy. They would die of smallpox in the beginning until we forced inoculations. We have to remember that before you could go into winter camp at Valley Forge, they actually would take any new soldier about 2 miles away, and they had an inoculation camp where they forced them to have a smallpox vaccination. If they lived, after about a month, they could come to camp and join the army. If they died, they died. But it was so smallpox got under control by 78 or so. But the other diseases just continued. The sick list increases daily. The greatest part of those evils, I am satisfied, proceed from the want of vegetables and vinegar, says General Washington. And he was right. The lack of vegetables, the lack of vitamins took its toll. Pellagra, scurvy, moon eyes, where lack of vitamins make you night blind. All kinds of diseases that happened. 70% of all deaths in the war were caused by disease. Majority was typhoid and typhus. Then after that was dysentery, then smallpox, which kind of fell off. Pellagra, which still continued. It's the lack of nixtamalization in corn, that is the lack of niacin, and because people are just eating raw corn flour, their bodies deteriorated. Beriberi was another one. I mean, there was a bunch of diseases that were well documented that now we look back at them, we're like, oh yeah, that's what they had. But it was just a lack of proper food. This was a dire straits for Washington. He wrote on December 23rd of 1777, I'm now convinced beyond a doubt that unless some great and capital change suddenly takes place in the supply line, this army must inevitably be reduced to one of or other of these three things. They're either going to starve, dissolve, or disperse in order to obtain subsistence, food, in the best manner they can. The government couldn't do it for them. We just couldn't pull it all together. We fed them just enough to keep them fighting, but certainly not enough to have a healthy life. So what were these foods in the ration? The first one, of course, would be corned meat. By corned, we don't mean like a modern corned beef. When we say corned beef, we just meant salted, heavily salted meat, packed in salt, brine, and then kept there for days, months, weeks. It can be kept in the solution and kept pretty much inevitably. Who knows how long salt pork or beef lasts. But it can be taken out and still not go rancid. The salt, goes into the cells, osmosis, and then it exchanges with the water molecules, and it basically inhibits bacteria. That you don't have the conditions you need for bacteria to grow in the food, so the salt will stop it. It was packed in barrels and carried on wagons, and then it was carried in haversacks. So you just have a bag where if you got your provisions for the march, you just shove your raw meat in the bag. That's how they would march. Salted fish was another thing. Salted fish was huge in New England. As a colony, our job was to supply the mother country. This is why we had a revolution. We weren't allowed to be self-sufficient. So a lot of these areas were heavily involved in one trade. About 35% of everyone in New England was involved in fishing. And a lot of that was salted fish as well to send back to Europe. Herring, sturgeon, mackerel, flounder, shad, those are the ones that you see most commonly in journal entries, and people could identify, what fish they were getting. Sergeant Smith, we marched in the morning by daybreak, and we drew fresh beef, hard bread, and salt herring. Salt's important to do this process, obviously, but there is no domestic place to get salt. Like, we had no domestic salt industry in America. We imported all of our salt from England. I mean, England has huge salt works. And so for the entirety of our existence as a colony, our job was to buy all that salt from England. Well, when we're at war with England, obviously first thing they're gonna do is cut off the salt. And because salt becomes a major battlefield, if you don't have salt provisions, you're gonna have a hard time moving these troops. So England cuts off salt. There is some small salt works that are started throughout the coastal US, and the British go and destroy them as quickly as possible. So every time a salt works gets made, they send, it's a primary task to destroy it. It was major infrastructure to the military to have salt. So we made a bargain with the Turks and Caicos down in Bermuda. They were a British colony, but they got all of their food from North America. So the Congress made a deal. We'll continue sending you food. We'll fill up our ships with food, and then when they get there, you just fill them all the way up with salt. And so we were just shipping under the cover of night salt back as quickly as we could. And this actually lasted for several years and got us through the bulk of the war. Finally, Britain put an end to it in 1779. But getting salt was a major problem, something that we don't really think about. So besides salted meat, we had fresh beef. Cattle was driven by the Army by drovers. They could move them 20 to 25 miles a day. The Army consumed about 2,000 head a month, making 300 rations from a single cow. Like Joseph Plum Martin said, 3/4 of his pound was bone, or half of it was bone. I mean, they're not giving you prime cuts. They're just giving you a chunk of meat. So this fresh beef would be set generally about a mile or so away from camp, because the slaughterhouses were, known for being a great place for disease, and they were going to destroy the water. So they tried to separate the slaughterhouses from the camp as much as they could, but they were just making this, beef on the go. But the British wanted the beef as well. So Washington writes in 1778, he makes a plea for meat. Friends, countrymen, and fellow citizens, rise up and support the Army in the utmost hour of need. Put up and feed as many cattle as you can spare. Those that the Army those that sell to the army will save their property from plunder, their families from insult, and their persons from abuse, hopeless confinement, perhaps a violent death. You know, a farmer had 20 head of cow. Both armies wanted them. So Washington is just trying to tell the American, you know, if you want, sell them to us, and we'll do you right, and we won't injure you. We won't take them. We're going to try to buy them from you, but otherwise the British are going to take them. They don't have any reservation about, you know, injury, abuse, confinement, or death. So food was a major part of this battle. Hard bread, ship's biscuit, sea bread, not hardtack. Hardtack is a word that comes about not until about 1833. It is what Civil War soldiers ate. They were square, they were generally white flour, and they were kind of industrial made. Sea bread or ship's biscuit was round and individually made. There was no machinery to make these. They're partially sifted wheat and flour. You take the bran out, so it's not whole wheat flour. It's partially sifted. And they also utilized some canal flour or short flour, or what they called biscuit flour, which was kind of when you're sifting out flour, you get these sharps. And the sharps were not good for bread, but they were great for biscuits, so they sold them to the biscuit maker. They're completely dried. They had no salt because salt's hydroscopic. It brings water. So if you're trying to keep your bread dry, you don't want to attract water to it. So we keep salt out of biscuits. And they're sized to be rationed at a set weight, and you have to soak them in water to make them edible. I did make some pea soup, and I segregated it out. I have some that's vegetarian, some that has salted beef in it, and then others that have chunks of hard bread in it that will hopefully be edible by the time we get to it, you know. It doesn't say how long to soak it. Plum Martin remembers gnawing on them, and they were hard enough to break a teeth of a rat. I've studied these biscuits for a long time. 2 weeks ago now, I was in Alexandria, Virginia, and I did a research trip out there, and I got to see this. So the previous one, if you look closely, it says on there 1784. That's the oldest ship's biscuit we know of. But in Alexandria, Virginia, we have one that is just a touch older. This was dug up during an excavation. Alexandria is one of the few cities in America. There's only 3 cities in America that require archaeology before any new building. So they were digging this area near the pier. They know that there was a bakery there from 1787 to 1802. Glad I wrote that down. So there was a bakery there that was supplying naval provisions, you know, that's right there on the Potomac. And they found this ship's biscuit. You can see how happy I am. So I got to see it. I heard about it, and I contacted the people, and I said, hey, I'd be really interested in seeing this. My name's Jeff Pavlik. I'm a bread historian. And they're like, Jeff, we've used all your research when we talk about this. I'm like, all right, so can I see it now? I'm like, yeah. So they were excited to meet me, and I was excited to meet them and see their biscuit. This is about 4 inches in diameter. About that thick, but the thing is, it's on the scale, it only weighs 35 grams. That's like 1.2 ounces. Like that, this should weigh about 4 ounces or so, at least 3.5. So I don't know what's happened to it. It's boggling my mind. I don't know if it got so carbonized, you know, that it got so burnt that it just turned into pure carbon and then it didn't melt in the snow. It didn't dissolve in the rain. No rat ate it. No squirrel ate it. Nothing ate it. I mean, it just sat there in this dirt. I mean, they just, you know, they have pictures of when they found it. It's just on the ground. It's not even inside the oven. Like Pompeii, it's like, yeah, that bread was sealed in an oven, and then, you know, we opened the oven, the bread's still there. But this was just on the ground. So who knows why, but it weighs nothing, so it got turned to carbon somehow. Anyone that's a scientist that can explain this to me, I'd love to find out. Yeah, it's neat. That's our oldest American piece of bread. I think it's the oldest piece of bread in America. As far as I can tell, there might be some native bread that's older, but I don't know of any that's been found in an archaeological site. So it's pretty exciting to see. They also ate soft bread. Soft bread would be known as ammunition bread or camp bread. That would have flour, water, salt, and yeast, those 4 basic ingredients of bread. It wouldn't be really made with a sourdough. Leaven at times, like a piece of dough from yesterday used in the batch tomorrow. So it would, you know, it could have a slight tang to it, but it wasn't like an involved sourdough process. They were used to using beer yeast and bread from, you know, just keeping a chunk of bread and moving it along. It was baked by professional bakers, issued in camp. General Ludwig, who was the head of the Continental Bakery, Baker's Corps, he went to Congress and said, hey, for 100 pounds of flour, I'll give you 135 pounds of bread. So it works out, that ratio works out to be about 54% hydration if you're a baker. This is pretty thick, solid bread. They weren't trying to add a lot of water to it. They're trying to get as many nutrients to the person as possible and make as few loaves as you need. So they're pretty compact sized loaves of bread. The two large loaves of bread over here that you see, that is 7 pounds of flour made into two 4.5-pound loaves. So we know this from a diary entry that I took my flour to the baker and my flour for the week, my 7 pounds of flour for the week to the baker, he gave me back two 4.5-pound loaves. So that is the amount of bread a person would eat in a week. That's a pound of flour a day. But you could also cheat, and bakers did. Bakers would cheat by saying the ration list that Congress wrote out says a pound of flour or bread a day. I can take a pound of flour and make you a loaf of bread that it weighs about 1.25 pounds, and that has all the flour in it. That's a pound of flour to about 1.25 pounds of bread. Or I can take about 25 or 30% of that flour away and just add more water and make a pound that equals, make a loaf that equals 1 pound. So I'm giving you your pound of flour. I'm doing what the ration says to give you a pound of flour or bread, but I'm giving you the pound of bread, not the pound of flour. So those small loaves over there, the one on the far right is a pound of flour made into 1.25 pound. The next one is 25% stolen by the baker, and the next one is 30% stolen by the baker. And I say steal because we have plenty of writings that go on between general officers talking about how the bakers are stealing the flour. At some point, they are desperate for flour, and the bakers are like, I got like 8,000 pounds over here. And they're like, where'd you get that from? And they're like, oh, I don't know. You know, they were just taking it. They were just taking off 25% of the flour for every loaf, and then they were stockpiling it and selling it back to the army. So it happened. You know, fraud and abuse in government spending is not new. If we don't have a baker to make us bread, we have to make our own. So we make what we call ash cakes or fire cakes or sodden bread. That's just where we take our pound of flour, we mix it with water, make it into a dough. If we have salt, we might add it to it. We probably don't have yeast on it, so this is unleavened bread, and we just throw it on the ashes. And then that will bake on the ashes. We flip it over, brush off the ash, and then eat it because we're hungry. They could be mixed in a trencher bowl, like a large dough bowl. Sometimes troops were issued dough bowls in the beginning of the war so they could mix their bread nicely, but those went away eventually, and people were just trying to use whatever they could to mix their dough in. They were baked on a rock if you wanted to be a little cleaner, or just put them right on the ash. Sodden bread, to the best I understand it, would be just unbaked bread, that they were eating sodden bread, meaning they put it on the fire, it started burning, and they're like, that's good enough, and they just ate it even though it was just dough. So if they also had their flour, they could do other things with it. They could do what J.L. Stewart in 1776 did. Most of us went without breakfast. We drew 1 day's allowance. We drew flour instead of bread, and we forced to make us some doughboys, and we boiled them up with some meat, and we eat about sundown. The next day, we draw no bread yet. We are forced to boil doughboys, and as yet drink lake water. We draw salt, pork, and peas today. So doughboys is just a simple dumpling. You know, you just mix your flour and water. Instead of throwing it on the ash, you just throw it in water, boil it, and you have a basic dumpling. But they called them doughboys. Sometimes, to mix your bread, you're obliged to mix our flour in our hats and bake it upon the bark chips before the fire, and broil our salt beef upon the coals. Like that other soldier said, they drank lake water, which a lot of people found disgusting. So throughout the whole campaign, the men had not eaten a morsel of bread, but mixed up their flour into cakes and baked them upon the stone before a fire. To render their provisions more palatable, when it rained hard, the men used to catch it in their caps and mix their flour right? So you're just catching rainwater to mix your flour so you don't have that funky lake taste in your bread. Spruce beer was on the menu. Spruce beer was first learned about by Cartier in 1536. All his men show up to North America and they're dying of scurvy. All the natives that he meets are fine. What's the difference? They're taking the tips of spruce trees and boiling it with water. They have an incredible amount of vitamin C in them. Of course, spruce tea wasn't good enough, so we had to make it into alcohol. So we started mixing molasses and spruce tips and fermenting it, adding yeast to it, fermenting it into a small beer, generally 1 to 3% alcohol, nothing much. And that spruce beer would imbibe you with vitamin C. It was a way of getting essential vitamins to prevent scurvy. So it was on the ration list, partly for the desire for alcohol that people had, but also to try to get vitamins into them. And when they weren't given the spruce beer, they were just given molasses, and they were expected to make their own. Rice was another part of the ration. It was South Carolina's primary export crop, 66 million pounds of rice in the 1770s. It was mainly sent, though, to Britain and Europe. Very little domestic consumption. We have soldiers' diaries. When the New England soldiers went south into the campaign, they were met with rice, and they just didn't know really what to do with it. One soldier talks about rice being made into bread. It's delicious, but I have no idea how they just did that. It was kind of an unknown thing, to a lot of folks in North America, because it was all shipped out. There wasn't a domestic economy of rice consumption, except for people in the South and their enslaved folks. Most of it was primarily Asian varieties, and that rice was brought to be grown in the Carolinas by Europeans, but the Europeans were specifically enslaving folks on the western coast of Africa that were rice growers. There's a native variety of African rice, and then early on the Portuguese brought rice, Asian rice, to Africa, and so folks that were being enslaved knew how to grow rice already, and they were specifically targeted and sold as people that knew this type of agriculture. The kind of rice that was being grown is some sort of Asian aromatic, something like a jasmine or basmati. But by the 1780s, we started having a new kind of rice called Carolina Gold, which you can still buy now. It's kind of our oldest heirloom rice. But it really doesn't, probably soldiers in the American Revolution weren't eating Carolina Gold rice. It hadn't really taken off. It's right during this time of revolution that the enslaved Africans that are in the South are developing this new strain. And then that new strain becomes a major part of American history. Then it disappears, and now it's back again. And it is fantastic rice. You can, get it, in a lot of places. It's well worth trying out some Carolina Gold if you haven't had any. Cornmeal. Cornmeal is a native plant to North America, and every colonist had corn. So it was always the default crop. If we didn't have flour, if we didn't have bread, at least we'd have corn, because it didn't matter where in the continent you were, there were people growing corn. So from that corn, you can make a cake. You can make Johnny cakes, journey cakes, hoe cakes. You can boil it down and make like a hasty pudding. And if you didn't have fine ground cornmeal, you could make samp, which just means it's coarser ground. It's like hasty pudding, but it's a little bit more like grits if they're not nixtamalized. We found a cornfield where corn, which we took and eat after we roasted it in the fire some. We pounded it with 2 stones and made samp. We find corn, we bang it, we make food. That's what soldiers did. Our bread was chiefly, of course, Indian meal, which we wet and bake on bark or stone. This is what people chiefly live on in these parts. It's what they call hoe cakes or hoe cakes. So yeah, these are just very old ways of eating corn. Of course, beans and peas are again part of the ration. Peas are native to Europe, but beans are native to North America. So beans show up on the American ration list, but they don't show up on the British list. high in fiber, they're easily transported, and of course people are making lots of bean soups. Peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot, 9 days old. That was written in 1760, so most soldiers probably had heard that, or if not, it was something that was probably said around the campfire. It was a known thing. And people knew that you could just keep peas on the fire, and you could go from pea soup, to peas porridge, and that if you wanted to, you could even put it in a bag, and make a pea pudding, that you could boil it up. Apple cider vinegar. You take apple cider, you take apple juice, you ferment it, and then that's the biological, or the yeast ferments it and makes it into alcohol, and then you have a secondary bacterial fermentation in which, like, that mother of the vinegar changes it to acetic acid. And because of that acidic taste, it was assumed that it would help prevent scurvy because it was like lemons, right? So vinegar was issued to soldiers because they thought they would ward off scurvy. They thought the same as sauerkraut, but sauerkraut actually could help scurvy because cabbage is very high in vitamin C. So in the instance of using it for sauerkraut, it was a win for fighting scurvy, and just issuing it as a drink, Switchel, which we'll have tonight, that's not going to fight off your vitamin C, but it tastes delicious. They were also given candles for guard and 20 pounds of soft or 8 pounds of hard soap for every 100 men per week. It's not a lot of soap. People weren't really great at bathing, though they did, and they weren't really great at washing their clothes because they're mostly young men. This is we have to remember the demographics of our soldiers. These are kids that don't want to take a bath, and they don't really care if their clothes stink. So we have this image here. This is actually just found recently, the last 2 or 3 years, and it is a snapshot, a drawing of the South Carolina Regiment moving through Philadelphia in 1777. It's one of the most beautiful images of the American Revolution. Because it's new, a lot of people haven't seen it. A lot of cool things on this image. One of them is the camp followers. You can see that there's women and children kind of nestled away in the wagon. They were trying to keep women out of the wagons as much as possible because they want to carry provisions, but women kind of found their way onto wagons. And they were also found their way into the Army. About 2% of the fighting force of the American Revolution were women. Now, they weren't necessarily the ones that were in battle, but they were actually part of the Army. They did laundry primarily, mending clothes, nursing, and some cooking, mainly for officers, not for enlisted, not for soldiers. Soldiers had to cook on their own. But they received a ration. That a woman would receive 1 ration per day and a child would receive a half a ration. We have this ration list from 1780. On the left-hand side is the officers. They got a certain amount of food. They got their beef, their flour, their rum, their potatoes. On the other side, it lists number of men, women, and children. The number of rations, beef, flour, salt, rum, potatoes, and of course the soap. But they were part of it. They were part of the Army. I mean, they are on the official roster of here's who we have to feed. Here's who's in our Army. Includes women and children. So when the men couldn't rely on women to cook for them or their moms any longer, they had to cook for themselves. And they had groups of 5 or 6 men called a mess. And a mess shared a tent. They shared their cooking equipment. They pulled their rations. They cooked together. They ate together, often with the same spoon and bowl. This is one of my favorite diary entries. Oh, I lost the fellow at the bottom. This is from like 1775. This guy's right in the beginning. He's up in New England. He's a young fella. He is right in the beginning of the American Revolution. His diary, the 23rd. Nothing strange this day. 24th, ditto, ditto, ditto. There's just nothing happening. 25th, it's good. I mean, it sounds like a text from my teenager. The 26th, very cold, nothing remarkable. 27th, there was a high go of drink and brandy, and several of the company were taken not very well soon after. 28th, nothing remarkable. 29th, nothing remarkable. Oh, it cut off. So what it says is, only on this day I was chosen to cook for the mess. I had a hard go at it, right? These are people that are not used to cooking for themselves, right? These are just young men that they are farmers, they're laborers. They're not cooks. That's women were doing that. Now all of a sudden they had to learn to cook for themselves. They got a bunch of gear. They got a tent, they got a kettle, they got a trencher for mixing dough sometimes. They got about 2 bowls for 6 people, right? And then they got about 3 spoons for 6 people. You could have your own personal eating equipment. You could bring your own wooden or pewter bowl. You could bring your own fork and spoon. You could bring your own knife. You could bring your own cup to drink out of. But mostly they were eating out of the same container. This was very standard in military practices. Every military in Europe did the same thing, where everyone basically just made a large pot of food and then you just ate out of it. And if you have enough utensils, great. These utensils are the ones that were found in New York at a Revolutionary War site. You can see that the knife is missing its handle. Maybe it had one, maybe it didn't. The spoon is missing its handle. Something happened. And the fork is just merely a piece of wire bent up and twisted to make a fork-like object. This is what soldiers were eating with. And how they got their food is fascinating. It's called "Who Shall Have This?" The orderly sergeant divided the meat into as many messes as there were a company, and then a soldier was made to turn his back to the pile. The sergeant would then put his hand upon the point of each pile separately and ask, "Who shall have this?" The soldier with his back to the pile then named the number of men in their mess, and in this way they proceeded until it was all dealt out. It was the fairest way they could do it. I mean, sometimes you're just going to get a great piece of meat, sometimes you're going to get mostly bone. By not looking at the food, don't look at like pick and choose. You just stand up, turn around, and then he points, and then you raise your hand. You get what you get, and you don't throw a fit. And this is how food was distributed on the regimental level. The most useless thing in the Army. This is a good old teenager Joseph Plum Martin in 1776. I was so beat out with hunger and fatigue that I could hardly move one more foot before the other. I told my messmates I could not carry our kettle any further, and they said they would not carry it any further. So what use of was it? We had nothing to cook, and so did not want anything else to cook with it. And then they proceed, in teenage fashion, to put it on the side of a hill and kick it down the hill. And they watch this pot just roll down, they giggle, and they march back to camp. And at camp, they see that we found our mess was not the only one that was rid of their iron bondage. I have some original pots and kettles over there. Because we're all food geeks, I'd like to show you that in 1755, the English dictionary says that a pot is given to the vessel which grows narrower to the top, and a kettle, which is one that grows wider. So the pot and the kettle calling each other black, they are 2 different things. They're 2 different things, but those are both both an original kettle and a pot. You're welcome to pick them up. They are heavy, and no soldier wants to just walk around lugging this, and when you get tired of it, they just toss them. The Army needed a new solution, so they went with things to boil in. In 1776, they adopted a new tin kettle, and you'll see that over there as well. And in that beautiful that picture that I showed you earlier that I love, you can see them hanging on the bottom of the wagon. They all just took their kettles and hung them on the bottom of the wagon because they just didn't even want to carry that. That only weighs not even a pound. But it's I don't want to carry this stuff. So they attached them to the wagon. Hopefully they got them back. They were about 10 by 10, sometimes with a lid. They held 3 gallons of water, but they were easily destroyed by frying. So General Washington makes an order against frying, obliging the men to accustom themselves more to boiled meats and soups and less to broiled and roasted, which as a constant diet is destructive to their health. It was also destroying the kettles. So they did whatever they could to stop men from frying food. But we'll see that these men figured out ways to fry food. So they hung the pots over the fire. They didn't have all this, if you go to reenactments a lot of times now, you'll see folks with all this iron and, these contraptions. They are just grabbing fork sticks and putting it through the bale. Maybe they had an S-hook that they could attach a piece of rope to. But generally, it was just their kitchen was made on site. They just made it where they were and with whatever they could find. We did not even take our camp kettles, and the troops suffered a good deal from the want of them, eating their beef roasted without any salt on the coals or held in the fire at the end of a stick sharpened. Indeed, we were so lucky at this time as to get hard bread. You're lucky to get hard bread, huh? So you don't have a kettle, your beef is on the coals, you're skewering meat on sticks, you're eating hard bread, you're making flour and ash cakes. And then Pickering says two-thirds of the week's flour was dealt out, which some of the soldiers made into cakes, and some into dumplings, boiling them with their meat, for we at length had sent for our camp kettles. So with our camp kettles, now we can make dumplings, we can boil our meat. Right? That kettle changed everything about how you're going to cook. It was your only utensil. And when you didn't have that, we had no meat. We had meat, but no bread. We had nothing to cook with but our ramrods, which we run through a piece of meat and roasted it over the fire, and to a hungry soldier, it tasted sweet. So in a musket, you pull out that long rod. It's what you put you send your charge and your ball down the barrel, and then you put it back into your musket to fire. So that long rod in military arms is made of metal. In civilian arms, it was made of wood. I wouldn't suggest roasting with that. But with the metal ones, you could skewer your meat and roast it like that over the fire. But you also could broil your meat on andirons or gridirons. So there's an original gridiron over there that looks just like the one that was found at Fort Stanwix from 1777. But when you don't have a piece of equipment from home, you just make do. So we have actually several of these found throughout historic sites, Revolutionary War sites, and they're broilers. They're just a piece of barrel hoop, that all that meat and all that flour was coming in. Undo the barrel hoop of a broken barrel, put it over the fire, twist it up. If you have a blacksmith around, that'd be a lot more helpful, but I'm sure they figured out how to do it without a blacksmith, and they just made broilers. And so I have one of those over there to see. They're really useful for either just putting your meat on top so your meat's not in the coals, or you can put your kettle on top and then you're giving it you can have a hot bed of coals without putting your kettle directly on the fire. And of course, men wanted to fry food. So this one here is from the Gunboat Philadelphia. It's a very large kettle, very large frying pan. I have one that was reproduced over there. This was on a boat, so it can be really big. But men would actually buy small frying pans if they could find them. On August 20th, Tilden says, I joined the mess in buying a short-handled frying pan to fry in, which cost me for my part 6 coppers. So they're buying these things. If they can't buy them, they'll make them. Just take an old shovel that you don't feel like digging anymore, take it to the blacksmith and bang the heck out of it until you get a frying pan out of it. We found several of these at historic sites as well. There's one over there to check out. That one's I made, and it's not the best. But you can use those broil hoops for all kinds of cooking equipment. Makeshift broilers, S-hooks to hang pots over, and even taking bayonets and bending them in, and so you can hang things off of over the fire. The most ingenious thing that was going on during this time was a camp kitchen. This camp kitchen is basically dug out of the ground, all the soil is thrown on top, and then into the substrate, into the soil, you dig a little hole, and you have for your firebox, and then you put a little hole on top. What this allowed for is adult supervision, that you were to take each mess could have one fire, and then the officer would go walking around the fire and making sure you weren't just wasting your food. Or if you needed help, you had people around you. Instead of being dispersed throughout the woods, you could have people help you cook because you maybe didn't know how to cook. We see this in period artwork. These were pretty common, especially if you're going to be in one place for a long time. I mean, you wouldn't dig this unless you're planning on camping there for a while. But if you were, they were incredibly efficient. Here's one friend of mine using one that we made. You can see that picture on the lower left. It puts out a lot of heat and in a very condensed space that really boils water quickly, and it uses wood very efficiently. So these were a great thing to utilize, and really helped out make your kitchen space more usable and quite ingenious. And they were being used by militaries around Europe as well. The haversack is what we'd carry our food in. It's just a linen bag that you would throw food in on as you were marching. You'd always just carry hard bread and salted meat in your bag and just have food on you. Now we have these nice MREs that are beautifully packaged and such. Here we just have a linen bag that we throw all the food in. There aren't that many recipes for this time period for soldiers. There's really only one. I mean, we can kind of assume the recipe for doughboys. We can kind of assume an ash cake recipe. We can assume how to broil meat. But this is the only actual recipe from the time that was designed for soldiers. This is from 1778. This is what I based the food that we're going to be eating in a few minutes off of. And it was an English recipe. It was written in England for British soldiers, but it's so general that any soldier would have figured this one out. And basically, you're taking your meat and you're boiling it with your peas. You're adding in vegetables if you have them, turnips, potatoes, onions, celery, Jerusalem artichokes, boiling it for hours. Then you're going to thicken it with oatmeal, flour, or rice. I thickened it with one of the batches with hard bread. And then you season it with salt and pepper, ginger, allspice, thyme, and savory. So that's what we use. In this one here, I use a lot of allspice and ginger, salt and pepper, and thyme is what we spice this with. It's a kind of a unique combination, something that we don't throw together these days. So that's what we'll be eating in a few minutes. Hasty pudding. Soldiers wanted food that reminded them of home, things that they were used to eating. I mean, they're not used to eating fire cakes. They're not used to roasting, food on a stick. So puddings were really common. Made it with grated bread, made it with just flour, oatmeal, corn, whatever you could put in a piece of linen and then tie it up and boil it for several hours. It will congeal. It will become a hard, not hard, but a substance that's like together. You could slice it, you could fry it, you could eat it as is. This fella says that he struck up a fire by a large stump with their camp kettle to make some hasty pudding and another kettle to heat some water to steep some tea. When done, I took a long board from a fence, because that's what are you going to do? You just, there, look, someone's fence. So that'll be useful for us. When I was done, I laid one end of the fence and the other on a stump, took off my kettle of pudding, turned out 6 piles on the board for the mess, 6 men in their mess. When the mess came and saw the pudding on a board, it made some sport. We had sugar in our packs, which we used with our pudding and tea. Our meat had already been cooked. We ate it as fast as possible, expecting every moment to hear the drums beating. They didn't know when the next battle was going to happen. So, but a good hasty pudding, that's something to write down about, right? I mean, now it's a meal that we wouldn't think twice about, but then it was a good day. Lapkus is another cool recipe. It's a word that is being used during this time, and it's basically you take your vile biscuit and you put it in a tin vessel with a sufficient quantity of water, permit it to stew on the stove until there's a perfect mucilage, some thin slices of bacon fat, the reserve of the last meal, and when the substances were all well incorporated with the biscuits, a few spoonfuls of molasses finished the dish. This was an ordinary breakfast and a good one when we could spoon it into our mouths. 1775, John Joseph Henry. So yeah, you're going to fry up your meat. You're going to get some fat in there. You're going to take your biscuits, break them all up, and you're just going to add the biscuits to this fatty, watery mix of hard bread that's getting softened, along with a little bit of meat. And then if you have molasses, throw it in there for a little flavor. Bubble and squeak. I just add this because I love its name. But bubble and squeak is still being made today. You can still find recipes for bubble and squeak. It was known about in the 18th century. This particular recipe comes out of an 1803 recipe book, but it's the same idea. You boil, chop, and fry with a little butter, pepper, and salt, some cabbage, and you lay it out on slices of rare done beef, lightly fried. So it's just beef and cabbage, right? But it has the greatest name. This one is called chowder. It comes from the Boston Evening Post. When we think of chowder, of course, we think of, clam chowder. But the first chowder recipe, which is this one, is actually a fish chowder. First, lay some onions to keep the pork from burning, because in chowder there could be no turning. Then lay some pork in slices very thin. This you in chowder always must begin. Next, lay some fish over crossways very nice. Then season them well with pepper, salt, and spice. Parsley, sweet marjoram, savory, and thyme. Then biscuits next, which must be soaked sometime. Thus, your foundation laid, you will be able to raise a chowder high as the Tower of Babel. I don't know what that rhyme's supposed to be. For them repeating over the same again, you may make chowder for 1,000 men. Last a bottle of claret and water enough to smother them. You'll have a mess with some called omnium gatherum. So yeah, this is your first chowder. It's onions, pork, fish, seasoning, and then ship's biscuits. You layer those up, and that is our first chowder. We don't know how often soldiers made this, but we know that they had all these kind of ingredients, and it's a fantastic recipe because we don't have a lot of recipes from this time that soldiers would have the opportunity to make, per se. To subsist an army well requires the utmost attention and exertion. Unless an army is properly fed, all calculations and schemes of enterprise are in vain. Experience has often convinced us the truth of this assertion, and sometimes at too dear a rate. Food made the army go. It always will, it always has. And the soldiers in the American Revolution had a tough go of it. You know, they had opportunities to either, be given food, but sometimes never arrived. They had long spates of time without bread. They had long spates of time without meat. Sometimes they had both. Sometimes they had neither. Vegetables were at a premium. That was hard to get hold of. They had to make do, and they had to make do for years upon years. As we saw earlier, Washington was really concerned that they had three options. These men were all going to starve or disperse and find food somewhere else, that the army was going to end. Not because we were losing, not because of morale, of not believing in the cause, but because they were just hungry, and that if they didn't have enough food to get them through to the next battle, Washington couldn't do anything about that. Washington had his hands tied to some extent. And so food is what really, comes down to it. Like in most of our human lives, we live or die by food. And this revolution lived and died, by the possibilities of having food or not having food. And it was a tenuous situation for the entire time. But at least we know what they could have eaten and what they sometimes ate. And we got to hear from their voices on how difficult this revolution was. Not the battles, but the food. That's all I got for you, so thank you. Any questions? Yes.
There was something listed.
One moment
Oh.
here. For the folks who are listening online, I gotta bring you a microphone so they can hear you.
Oh, okay. Could you use this one, or is?
Yeah, they could use that one.
I'm closer.
There was something listed on the food list.
Okay.
I wish I'd written it down, but I think it was firkin ditto.
Oh, firkin of butter, ditto. So a firkin is a unit of measurement that is in a barrel. So it was for butter, and it was for either a large amount of butter, a barrel of butter, or a firkin of butter. So either a large amount of butter or a smaller amount of butter. And ditto just means it probably said butter, and then underneath it said ditto, because it was barrel, butter, firkin, ditto. So that just meant that they wanted that much butter in that container, and it's just a smaller amount of butter. Yeah. Reading 18th century is it's a whole other language. I know it's in English, but it's a whole other language. Any other questions from the chat, or
Let me take a look.
anything else from the audience? So yeah, over here we have all the different rations laid out. Those are the set amount. That is the amount of peas they would get, or the amount of beans, the amount of rice or cornmeal. That is a pound of flour. There are 5 hard breads over there. They each, those 5 weigh exactly a pound. So that would be a pound of hard bread. Or you can see what a pound of soft bread was, depending on how much the baker took. And then your weekly allowance, your total amount of bread you would get, are those 2 loaves. That's kind of like, imagine how much, could you eat that much bread in a week? Maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. There is also salted meat back there, salted beef and salted pork, as well as all the various, cooking tools that we talked about.
I'm coming to you.
I was wondering if you know approximately how much of your average soldier's time was spent dealing with food, finding it, hunting it, stealing it, cooking it, eating it,
Right.
compared to fighting.
Right. Yeah, fighting, battles were there was 160 something major engagements. There was a lot of other, small skirmishes, but battles were rather well drawn out. That we knew where this army was going to meet this army, and at that point, cooking was, sidelined. And we read that like, oh, I haven't eaten in, a day or 2 days. But most of the time, the Army was just waiting to figure out what we're going to do next. And so, yeah, a lot of time was being spent on cooking. But they didn't always know when. There's a quote in there that we ate at sundown, and other times, it's a good breakfast. But, no one was, it was doubtful that they were getting breakfast and dinner on a regular schedule, If you read the Joseph Plum Martin's book, and there's copies everywhere. I mean, it's been republished a number of times. Again, he was a hungry teenager, but I mean, there's almost not a page that goes by that he doesn't talk about how hungry he is or something about food. I mean, it was on his mind constantly. So it was whether, they were eating or whether or not they were not eating. But it was it's what was on their mind a lot. It's not, I gave you a very small amount of quotes about food. There is so many more because people were always thinking about food. So how much time did they actually get to make it? Depending on if they had it, If they had it, then, they would have a regular schedule. Like at those camp kitchens, they would have a regular schedule of when people are, using the kitchen, who's cooking when, who's cooking next, and they would, spend a time. But to boil meat and cook peas, that could take, at least an hour or more, to get just a basic, a meal. If you're making bean soup, that takes hours. You're going to have to keep beans on the fire for hours. So it could take up quite a bit of time.
If you can you give us some insight into how the rations for the Army compared to what the civilians were eating?
Yeah, I mean, one of the slides that I took out was, it was just the ration list, but it was a broadside, like an advertisement to join the Army, to join the flying camp. And it was basically just join the Army, we need your help now, and then the ration list. Why? Because it meant you got food, It's the same reason that a lot of my students are going to join the military as well, because it's just like at least you get guaranteed food and housing and medical care to some extent, right? So the civilian population in many ways was under a lot of hardship. I mean, the economy was in turmoil. There's a civil war basically going on. I mean, we don't think about it but in their minds, it was a civil war going on, and their regular norms were broken. And like I said, if they did have food, the British are trying to get it and the Americans are trying to get it. So, there were very few people that were just isolated in their little corner of the world, not being affected, by the war, but especially with their food, like we said, Washington's like, if they have a horse that we can use, take it. If they have they have sheep or cows that we can eat, take them. So even if you're just trying to live your life and, feed well, I mean, Washington at least said keep the milk cows for them. So at least you'd have milk and, some basic, cheese. But yeah, no, people, it was hard times for everyone. It was hard times for everyone.
We have a question over here.
Were the rations allowed for the military, the enlisted, the same as if you were an officer?
No. Like I said, this was an hour-and-a-half presentation. I tried to get this, but no, they were not. George Washington got 40 rations per day. A general usually got 30. A colonel might get 20. A major might get 15. Lieutenant would get 5. And that extra ration, it wasn't that they were going to eat that much food, but they generally had people working for them. So Washington's rations went to all of his servants, all of his people that were auxiliary to him, his followers, his wife, Martha was at every winter encampment as well. So if you were, a captain, you might have, a cook with you, and that person was working for you. You had to feed that person that was going to be cooking for you. So you could also return those rations in. So we have a lot of returns where it's like Captain so-and-so got 5 rations and returned 4 of them. So they were allocated 5 rations, but they would turn them in for money. So that if you weren't utilizing all of it, it was kind of a way of boosting your pay. So that, because each ration was set by Congress to be X amount of money, how much money each year they said the ration shouldn't exceed X amount. So if you didn't use your ration, you could turn that in for money for payment later. So yeah, no, officers got quite a bit more.
What was the quality of the rations, officers versus enlisted?
You know, well, they're eating out of the same trough, you know, but you obviously could get more. I mean, if you had money, you had the opportunity to buy on the open market, you know. So if you're passing through a town and someone's selling cheese and eggs, you had money to buy it. You know, your beef might not be any better, your flour might not be any better, but, you know, you at least be able to supplement it with something else. But, yeah, there wasn't like separate officers' cows, you know. I'm sure they gave them better cuts, but I've never run across the cut, you know, the butcher's diary that says like, yeah, we segregate, or the bakers. We do know that like bakers were making, you know, special breads for, you know, Washington. Like Washington liked, you know, gingerbread, so the bakers were making gingerbread just for George Washington, and he would pay them. You know, we have receipts between that, so you could, if you could afford it, things you could get more. But as far as I know, there was no like, you know, I haven't run across anything that says like, yeah, we give all the choice cuts to, you know, to the officers, but they probably happened.
Probably will have time for another question or two. I'm coming to you.
If you were enlisted just as a regular Army person, were you enlisted for a certain period of time? So it wasn't,
In
you
the
either
beginning-
die or jump ship?
Yeah, in the beginning of the war, it was a 1-year enlistment, and they generally ran out on like right around New Year's Day. And so Washington was always really nervous about his army just being done. Like the next year, like when New Year's hit, so that's why, you know, the Battle of Trenton, like you know, Washington crossing the Delaware, that happens on, you know, December 25th. He only had those soldiers for another 5 days, and then most of them were just going to be like out here. So he had to make as much of that last couple days, and soldiers would leave after a year. You know, they had a 1-year enlistment. Later on, the enlistment was, you know, for the duration of the war in some places, and you also had state militias. So we had state militias, we had the Continental Army. So there's different ways of doing it, and there's a lot of people that just desert it. You know, like what I'm wearing is based off of just deserter ads. That in the paper every time the paper was published, there would just be pages of so-and-so deserted from this regiment. He was wearing this when he left, you know. So we have a real clear view of what soldiers were wearing because we know what they looked like when they left the Army. Because they would take the bounty, they would take the money, and then run. So desertion was a high thing. Sometimes they would run and never come back. Other times they would just go find another unit and think, hey, I'd like to enlist, and then get their money and then take off and do it. They'd just, you know, serially try to do this. So, yeah, so sometimes it was a year enlistment in the beginning. They try to make it a longer enlistment towards the end of the war. Yeah.
Maybe my last question right here.
They sound kind of like subprime lenders or something, phone scammers. You know, making a pitch for New York, because you mentioned Sneeden's Landing, and I'm from near there.
Oh, right
you
on.
know? Yeah, I grew up in Japan. Does your research involve a lot of traveling, like to these historic sites? You know, where I grew up in Japan, New York, where you have the Masonic Shrine and the DeWitt House and the 76 House, which was the courthouse where John Andre and Benedict Arnold were convicted of treason.
Right.
So does it? I was just curious when I saw that, because I was like, oh wow. You know,
I do get travel. Most of my traveling right now is that I'm doing work with Valley Forge Historic Site, working on George Washington ordered ovens from a ironsmith in New Jersey, an iron master in New Jersey, and they were portable ovens, and they've always been kind of a mystery as to what they would look like. People have their speculations, and I've been working on it for several years, and I think I've nailed it. And so that work is going to go first to the Valley Forge, and then we're going to reproduce based on, you know, the most current research that. So most of my work when I travel lately has been to Pennsylvania. But like I said, I was in West Virginia last week to a Revolutionary War site, and this October I'll be headed up to White Plains, which was the big battle between the Americans and the British outside of New York City. So that happened in '76. So as the war progresses, I'll be headed further out east to where the battles were, you know, at least a couple times a year. So, yeah, so I do get to go there and research and check out those sites. Right. I haven't. I have a lot of invitations to go there. I owned a bakery for 24 and a half years, and so that limits the travel scope big time. And now that I'm a teacher and I have summers off, I'm taking full advantage of it. Oh yeah. Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, the campaigns in the South will be, the big campaigns were really after, in 80, after 81, 82 and such. We have a lot of, the bigger battles that took place in there. But yeah, so I'm hoping to get down in that area for sure. Sure. Yep. Anything else? Well, we have food. Like I said, I took that last recipe, or that first recipe we showed you, the feeding cheap soup for 6 people. So I have a vegetarian version, and then I have a salt beef version, and then I have a version with the ship's biscuits in it, which don't crunch down real hard, because I don't know how. I don't want to break any teeth. They should be fully hydrated by now, but and it's like I said, I took them off the stove. It is really nice having a full industrial kitchen as a classroom. So I took them off the stove, right before I got in the car, and so they should at least be warm. They're in the box. So we have those 3 options that you can try a little of each. There's plenty. So yeah, we'll at least get to taste a little of the revolution.
How about a round of applause?
It'll take a minute to get the food put out.